Hear the good news. Remember that you are dust, and to dust you will return. Vapor, havel, the fleeting moment, the breath we call life is not a specific length, a guarantee. It is not a predictable amount of time. It is life. The journey in its entirety from cradle to the grave, from our first breath until our breath becomes air. After Israel's 40 years wandering in the wilderness and Jesus' 40 days of testing in the wilderness, the liturgical sensibility of Lent's 40 days provide a clear connection to the biblical symbolism of 40, a long time, a lifetime, life. And the trick is that life includes death. Death is a part of life. Finitude, after all, is what makes life sweet. During this season, we seek to create a liturgical near-death experience, to face death all these 40 days as we remind ourselves of the frailty and fragility of life that holds fast these fascinating arrangements of breath and dust. And so we aim to breathe, not only as an automated physiological program, but to breathe on purpose, to feel what it feels like to gasp for breath. And as we struggle to breathe, to realize at that moment that life is fleeting, that life is for living, that in the face of death, we would choose the mess and the pain and the broken promises of this life, because life is where love is found, which is stronger than death. Maybe we can allow this proximity to death to change us. Maybe the season of death for us can be a good thing, can make us appreciate life, can make us strive, can give us extreme focus. Maybe we can allow this proximity to death to form us. Ash Wednesday, like the season of Lent, which it begins, aims to put us squarely in this proximity to death, to place us in the presence and the gravity of mortality, to ask of us in the presence of ashes, the symbol of our inevitable passing in the face of Hevel, vapor. With death imminent before us, Ash Wednesday asks us, by the gift harbored in the promise of death, to live. Not only to exist or to strive, but to live, knowing that we cannot truly live until we come to terms with and face death itself. And in so doing, can become one with the God who dies, in the kind of life that defies to let death define life. For thousands of years, the Christian tradition has adopted the custom of preparing for Jesus' death and resurrection by a season of mindfulness, of self-reflection, and elevated awareness. It has also been a time when the congregation names the need that all people have to renew their courage for life in the face of death. I invite you tonight, in both the life and the death, which are harbored in the name of God, to enter into a sacred observance of the season of Lent. To mark our intention to name death in our bodies, we begin by embracing the sign of our mortal nature with a reminder of ashes. So if you would like to have ashes imposed on your forehead, feel free to come forward and to hear this good news once more. Remember that you are dust, and to dust you will return.
If you Google the season of Lent, you get something like the events leading up to the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ. Like we cut straight from Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem to the cross. I admit in the past that I've held this same one-dimensional perception of the season of Lent. As we enter into it, the Christian calendar, complete with its hindsight bias, has us thinking in terms of doom and gloom. We know the crucifixion is looming. Yes, the Christian tradition can't even let it be a surprise They color the entire last season of Jesus' ministry as the thing that got him killed. Not the time when he flips the tables, not the dining with the sinners bit, or cursing the fig tree. Just overlook all the parables about our relationships with earthly power structures and wealth. Forget about the mic drop, about the, greatest commandment, whatever. We often focus solely on the fact that Jesus dies and overlook the work that Jesus does. I have a suspicion that this orientation, deliberately or not, has more to do with what Jesus can do for us, if you lean that way atonement-wise, and less on how we ought to live in the world. It has to do with our domestication of Jesus' life so that we don't have to take it seriously in ours. No, death dogged this man's steps from his earliest memories. Do you recall the slaughter of innocents? Herod has all the male infants and toddlers of his entire homeland rounded up and killed in hopes that Jesus is among their number. Baggage much? He lived with an awareness of the finitude of life for the entirety of the most terrible violence imaginable, the heaviest burden I can fathom. And then the tradition acts surprised, as though the way he was living wasn't always going to get him killed, as if anyone gets out alive. As though a Messiah who preaches convenient truths and heals, a few people only on the correct days of the week, lives to a ripe old age with a great big, gray beard, and dies in his sleep is at all compelling, as if a convenient prophet like that would know anything about my real human suffering. So maybe my Jesus timeline is off, but I think I recall this 40 days being the climax of Jesus' ministry. This is the time in which he was most alive, when he was so close to death, like he was living as though his death depended on it, and it did. Mortality, the closeness of our walk with death, gives us the gifts of vulnerability, presence, and authenticity, knowing that we are always drawing nearer to our last breath, invites us to die to our pride and our vanity and our ego and our expectations right now. We begin to see how fleeting they are and always were, and we are invited to be radically here, radically present, fully alive. And this is what coming face to face with our fragility looks like. This is what it tastes like. In this community, in this family, we rehearse that story every week. We remind ourselves of this particular story of body separated from blood so that we can embrace the depth rather than the length of life, so that we can embody a story worthy of being retold and remembered. Here is my body. And here is my blood. The invitation to be present exactly as we are is extended to each of us in every new moment. This table is open to us and to all people, and no one will ever be turned away. When you're ready, feel free to come forward and grab a piece of bread and dip it in the cup.